You've probably seen this photo circulating around and have heard about the case involved. Well, if that happened, I need to tell you that everything you saw or read is not true. You may be wondering how I know this. It's simple. I discovered some secret files that belong to my grandfather, who directly participated in the autopsy of an alien. Believe me, reality is much scarier than anything you could have imagined. My name is Gary Baxley. I'm 20 years old, and my entire life has been spent in Carlsbad, New Mexico. It's a peaceful place, where the most exciting event is probably the TV losing signal. My life has always been flat, without major ups and downs, and I liked it that way. The peaceful routine where I spent hours playing video games in a safe bubble, away from the responsibilities of the real world. My father, Christopher Baxley, aged 45, had already come to terms with the fact that his son was considered a hopeless slacker. Our relationship was, at best, distant. He tried to make me take on some responsibilities from time to time, but he usually left me to my own devices in a resigned way. Everything changed the day my father entered my room with that look I already knew well, the look that said he expected something from me, something I definitely didn't want to do. "Gary, I need you to go to Grandpa's house in Artesia," he said, straight to the point. His tone was decisive and left no room for discussion. "I want you and Jackson to go clean it up. It's been years since anyone has stepped foot in there and it's a real mess." At first I thought he was joking. Cleaning my late grandfather's house, which was in the middle of nowhere with my cousin Jackson, who was almost as work-averse as I was definitely not my idea of an attractive plan. But the look on my father's face made it clear that there was no choice. "And why don't you go?" I asked, even though I knew it was a futile question. "Because I need it to be you," he replied with a firm, almost authoritative tone, which was unusual for him. "It's time for you to take on some responsibilities." I sighed, resigned. There wasn't much to discuss. So the next day, there I was, in my dad's old truck, next to Jackson, heading toward that house in Artesia, which was barely worth the trip. The journey was uncomfortable, both due to the suffocating heat and the awkward silence we shared. Neither of us were excited about the idea of spending the day cleaning out a dusty old house. When we finally arrived, the sight of Grandpa's house only worsened my mood. The place was in ruins. The windows were broken or covered in dust. The paint on the walls was crumbling, and the garden had turned into a field of tall grass. "Well, here we are," Jackson said as he got out of the truck. "I think we better get started." The main door creaked eerily when we opened it. The inside of the house was in an even worse state than I imagined. A musty smell permeated the air, and the rooms were filled with dust, cobwebs, and memories of a life that no longer existed. The first find was a bunch of old newspapers piled in a corner, almost hidden behind a half-fallen bookshelf. I bent down to pick one up, and as I unfolded the paper disintegrated a little in my hands, revealing headlines about UFO sightings and mysterious disappearances. Not the kind of thing you'd expect to find in the home of a respectable doctor like mine, grandfather. The articles were alarming, almost conspiratorial, and had a disturbing feeling. But there wasn't time to read everything. We had a mountain of rubble to remove before dark. While Jackson tried to lift a heavy piece of furniture, Jackson tripped over something on the floor as he tried to move around the dust-covered couch. He fell face down on the floor, swearing. "Hell!" he exclaimed, while rubbing his knee. "What is that?" I moved closer to see what had caused him to fall. Underneath the shabby and worn-out carpet in the hall, there was a small metal plate. Jackson pulled it tight, revealing what appeared to be a hatch. We stared at the metal door embedded in the floor, confused. I didn't remember seeing anything like this on my previous visits to Grandpa's house, but if I'm being honest, I barely paid attention to anything when I came here as a kid. "Do you think we should open it?" I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. Jackson looked at me with a mix of curiosity and caution. "And why not?" he finally replied with a challenging tone. "It's probably just an old basement," but his tone was less than convincing. There was something about the way the hatch was hidden that bothered me, but curiosity was stronger than fear. We both crouched down and with effort managed to lift the hatch, which made a frightening creak as it opened, revealing a staircase leading down into the darkness. The basement was not lit, and the air rising was colder and damp, filled with an earthy smell. I took the flashlight from the car and turned it on, pointing it into the darkness. The light revealed a worn wooden staircase that looked like it hadn't been walked on in years. Go down first, Jackson said, pushing me slightly. I sighed and began to carefully descend, with each step resonating with the walls of what seemed to be an enclosed, narrow space. Jackson followed closely behind me. The tension was palpable as we descended. The flashlight light began to reveal more details. Rough stone walls, cobwebs hanging like curtains, and a dirt floor. When we finally reached the bottom, the flashlight illuminated a large, heavy box in the center of the basement. It was meticulously wrapped with black tape, as if someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that no one could open it easily. There was something unsettling about the box. It didn't look like a simple storage box, but more like a carefully closed container for storing something important or dangerous. "What do you think is inside?" I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Jackson approached, feeling the box carefully, as if expecting something to jump out of it at any moment. "There's only one way to find out," he said, and began to remove the black tape with shaking hands. Each pull seemed to resonate in the basement, amplifying the feeling that we were doing something forbidden. When we finally removed all the tape, we came across a safe. Its heavy metal frame was covered in dust, but one could still make out an old numeric dial on the front. "This isn't going to be easy," I muttered. "I'll try," I replied, although I wasn't completely sure. I started turning the dial, testing random combinations. 10 right, 15 left, 20 right. But each attempt ended in a dull click, indicating that the combination was incorrect. I tried again and again, but the mechanism wouldn't budge. "This is useless," I finally said, turning away with a sigh. Jackson crouched down to try, but after several failed attempts, we both realized we wouldn't be able to open the box without the correct combination. "Let's go upstairs," Jackson said, standing up. "We won't be able to open it even in a dream." I nodded, although the idea of leaving the safe closed bothered me. We went back up to the hall and continued with the cleaning, although our minds were. As I was dusting some old books on a shelf, a clicking sound caught my attention. One particularly thick book moved aside, revealing a folder hidden between the pages. Carefully, I removed it, noticing that it was full of yellowed papers corroded by humidity. "What did you find?" Jackson asked, approaching. I opened the folder and my eyes fell on the first pages. They were old documents, written in a firm and elegant handwriting. I quickly flipped through them, realizing that most were notes that didn't make much sense to me. But what really caught my attention were some numbers written at the top of the first 7 pages. They were sequences of 5 digits, but on each of these pages, one of the numbers was highlighted in a different color. "Look at this," he said, showing the papers to Jackson. "These numbers seem to follow some kind of pattern." Jackson frowned as he examined it. "It could be the match we're looking for," he murmured, as if afraid someone would hear us. I felt a rush of adrenaline. It was possible that these numbers were the key to opening the safe. Without wasting time, I wrote down the sequence of highlighted numbers, and then we headed back to the basement. Once in front of the box, I knelt down and began turning the dial, entering the combination I had written down. My heart was pounding, and each click of the mechanism echoed in the silence of the basement. Finally, as I turned the last number, I heard a different click, deeper and more definitive. We looked at each other with wide eyes. The safe opened with a metallic creak, revealing a folder inside marked with the word "Classified." "Do you open it, or do I open it?" Jackson asked in a whisper, clearly feeling the same tension as me. "I'll open it," I replied, although my voice sounded more determined than I actually felt. I took the folder with shaking hands and opened it carefully. Inside was a collection of documents, many of them handwritten in my grandfather's firm, elegant handwriting. I began reading the first report, and as my eyes scanned the lines, a dark story began to unfold before me. My grandfather, Sir Henry Baxley, according to the report, was born in Artesia, New Mexico, and moved to Boston in his youth to study medicine at Harvard Medical School. His career took off quickly, and he graduated with honors in 1935. He was a brilliant man with a promising future. Rather than pursue a conventional career in medicine, my grandfather joined the United States Army Medical Corps, an unexpected decision that led him to participate in some of the most secretive and disturbing military operations of his time. In the following years, he worked in public medical clinics but was gradually drawn into the secrets of the Army. The report described how, from 1935, my grandfather began working for the Medical Corps, playing a crucial role in the health of troops, management of military hospitals, and medical research. His surgical skills and his ability to maintain his composure in extreme situations made him a valuable asset to the army. But what really captured my attention was one particular event, an incident that occurred in 1947, described by my grandfather in chilling detail. According to the report, it all started on July 2nd of that year, a day that was supposed to be his day off. However, at 10:40 in the morning, he received an urgent call from the military base in Nevada. General Archer, described as a strict and authoritarian man, demanded that he report immediately to the base to deal with an extremely urgent case. My grandfather tried to postpone his arrival until the next day, but the general's insistence soon turned into an inescapable order. At 11 a.m., a Sikorsky Air 4 military helicopter landed in his front yard. Sir Henry mentioned in the report how impressed he was with the technology of the time, as it was the first time he had seen a helicopter in person. However, admiration was soon eclipsed by concern when he realized that the two soldiers who accompanied him were carrying large-caliber weapons, as if they were ready to face something more than a simple human enemy. The report went on to describe how, upon arriving at the base, he found himself surrounded by extremely tight security. There were more than 100 soldiers guarding the perimeter, and he was escorted by 5 soldiers to an underground medical unit. Upon getting out of the helicopter, Henry found himself surrounded by a contingent of soldiers, all armed and with an impenetrable expression. 5 of them escorted him to the base entrance, where he was greeted by General Archer himself. The urgency in the general's eyes was unmistakable. "We need you to perform immediate surgery, Doctor." "Baxley," Archer said, barely giving him time to nod. "How many soldiers are injured?" asked my grandfather, trying to get some information about the nature of the case. The general stared at him as if evaluating how much he could reveal. "Maybe this isn't human." Finally, General Archer responded with a coldness that made my grandfather's blood run cold. Leaving no room for further questions, he began to explain what had happened. That morning, around 5 a.m., the base's radars detected 2 unidentified flying objects flying over the Pacific Ocean at high speed, a speed that exceeded any technology known at the time, which led the military to send 2 P-50 Mustang planes to intercept them. "The objects were flying so fast that we could barely keep up with them," Archer continued. "They were heading towards the interior of the country, and upon arriving near Phoenix, one of our planes managed to hit one of the objects with a missile." My grandfather listened in disbelief, unable to imagine what he was about to see. Archer went on to describe how the hit object crashed on the outskirts of Roswell at 5:30 a.m. Immediately, a military squad was sent to the impact site, where they found the remains of the ship and something else. "We found bodies," Archer said in a deep voice, "beings that don't belong in this world." The impact of those words hit my grandfather like a punch. Without giving him time to process the information, Archer led him to an underground room, beyond any common access area in the base. There, a penetrating and unfamiliar odor greeted him, an odor that he would soon associate with the horror he was about to witness. When the general lifted the tarpaulin covering the stretcher in the center of the room, my grandfather was faced with a creature that defied all logic. It was a being approximately 1.2 meters long, covered in hair from head to toe, with an elongated snout and black, empty eyes. There were no visible ears or reproductive organs, and its appearance was so strange and disturbing that Henry instantly vomited, unable to contain his revulsion. "You must perform the autopsy," Archer said with no room for protest. The smell was a mixture of rotting meat and chemicals, so strong that it made my grandfather vomit right there, in front of everyone. The other doctors didn't react, perhaps accustomed to this type of scene. But for Henry, this was further proof that what he was seeing shouldn't exist. Despite his resistance, Henry knew he had no choice. Under the strict surveillance of the military and with the implicit threat of Archer, he was forced to perform the autopsy. With shaking hands, he put on his surgical gloves and prepared to make the first cut. As he inserted the scalpel into the creature's skin, Henry noticed something immediately unusual. The skin was much thicker and tougher than he had anticipated, as if he were cutting through thick leather. And when the blade finally penetrated, a thick, dark green liquid gushed from the wound, emitting a new burst of that nauseating odor. The liquid was viscous, like a mix between blood and some kind of sticky resin, and it had an iridescent shine under the fluorescent light. As he continued with the incision, Henry revealed a layer of muscle that looked like nothing he had seen before. The fibers were intertwined, and of a pale color, almost white, which contrasted strongly with the green of the blood. When he dissected the head, he noticed something even more incredible. His brain was divided into 7 hemispheres, with the frontal hemisphere being larger, and in the area that should have been the cerebellum, there was a small white mass that connected the 7 hemispheres together. His brain divided into 7 hemispheres presented a complexity that escaped all known logic. For hours, my grandfather worked under the watchful eye of soldiers, documenting every discovery, every finding that defied the laws of biology. He had documented everything meticulously, with the hope that someday this information would be revealed. He knew that what he had discovered was monumental, something that could forever change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. With each entry, Henry felt a growing internal conflict. On the one hand, was his duty as a doctor and scientist to share his findings with the scientific community and the world at large. On the other, there was fear, not only for his life, but for that of everyone around him. He knew that the army would not allow this information to come to light, and every time he looked up and saw the armed soldiers guarding him, this fear became more real. Finally, when he finished documenting everything he had discovered, Henry cleaned his hands and took off his surgical gloves, trying to shake off the dirty feeling that was filling him. I knew I had to talk to General Archer, try to convince him that this information should be shared, that the world had a right to know. He was taken back to the general's office where Archer was waiting for him. As if he had anticipated that Henry would ask to talk, the general was already waiting for him when my grandfather, still shaken by what he had seen, took a seat at his table. Feeling the cold of the metal beneath his hands, he began in a voice that tried to remain steady. "What I discovered today is something the entire world needs to know. It would be a crime against humanity to hide it," he told General Archer. The general looked at him with an unreadable expression, his eyes as cold as steel. A long silence followed, which made Henry's stomach tighten. The general finally spoke, but not with the tone Henry expected. "Dr. Baxley, I understand your position," said Archer without a trace of emotion, "but what you suggest is impossible. This find cannot leave this base. In fact, it cannot leave this room." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. Despite his good intentions, he knew he was facing an insurmountable barrier. Archer was not a man who was easily convinced, and in his eyes was an unshakable determination to keep all of this secret at any cost. "But General," insisted Henry, "it could change the course of history. We can't just hide it." Archer leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His expression hardened even more, and his voice lowered a tone, becoming almost a threatening whisper. "Dr. Baxley, this discovery does not belong to history. It belongs to us, and if you value your life and that of your family, you will not mention this to anyone again. Not your colleagues, not your wife, not anyone." Henry was silent, finally understanding the gravity of the situation. There was something in the general's eyes that made him realize that this was not an empty threat. My grandfather felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of fear and frustration that he couldn't release. "Understood?" asked Archer, with a tone that brooked no reply. "Yes, sir," replied Henry, his voice dull. The general looked pleased, as if that solved everything, but before Henry could get up to leave, Archer added something else, something that made my grandfather's skin crawl. "There is something else you should know, Dr. Baxley. The creature you dissected is not the only one. There was another similar to the one you examined that was captured alive." "Where is it?" Henry asked, although deep down he knew he didn't want to know the answer. Archer didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at him with that imperturbable coldness. "That's not something you need to know, Doctor," he finally replied. "Your work here is done. You will be escorted home, and I advise you not to think about it again, for your own good." Henry nodded slowly, knowing that any further resistance would be futile and even dangerous. He was escorted out of the general's office, feeling that with each step he was moving further away from everything he had known as reality. That night, when he finally got home, he sat in his office, shaking as he tried to put into words everything he had seen and discovered. "I knew I couldn't keep this secret alone, but I also knew I couldn't share it openly. I was trapped in an impossible dilemma between truth and fear, between knowledge and survival." The archive of my grandfather, Sir Henry Baxley, not only revealed a dark and disturbing secret, but also told the tragic story of a man whose life was consumed by the weight of that secret. As Jackson and I read the last few pages, we realized how irreversibly his life had changed since the moment he signed that fateful confidentiality agreement after witnessing the alien creature's autopsy. Henry was forced to sign a document that condemned him to absolute silence under threat of death. He knew that by doing so, he was committing himself to taking to his grave the truth of what he had seen that day at the military base in Nevada. However, even though he signed the agreement, the idea of telling the world what he had witnessed never disappeared from his mind. On July 9th, just a week after the incident, Henry leafed through the newspapers with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. The title that occupied the front page of the Roswell Daily Record was a cruel irony of what he knew. The United States Army declared that the flying saucer that had crashed was simply a conventional weather balloon. When he read these words, he felt as if reality itself was betraying him. I knew that what the newspapers said was a blatant lie, a smokescreen to hide what had really happened, but I couldn't do anything. He was trapped, forced to remain silent due to fear of the threats that weighed on him and his family. The years that followed were a constant struggle against paranoia and fear. Henry tried to move on with his life, but the weight of the secret consumed him inside. With each passing day, he felt as if he was betraying not only himself, but all of humanity by keeping the truth hidden. It was this weight that, in the end, pushed him to make a decision. If he couldn't speak, he could at least leave a written record of what he had witnessed. Almost 10 years after the incident, in an act of desperation, Henry decided to record everything in a detailed report. He sat down at his desk in the dim light of his office and began to write. The words flowed from his pen with an urgency that reflected the need to free himself from the burden he had carried for so long. He described every detail of that day at the secret base in Nevada, from General Archer's call to seeing the creature he had dissected. He omitted nothing, aware that this report could be his only chance to one day bring the truth to light. When he finished writing, he added an afterword, a warning to any future reader. I write this report to tell my story to the world and what really happened on that military base. I do this in case something happens to me, as I live under constant threats from the Army. It was a declaration of his intentions, a promise that if he failed to spread the truth in his lifetime, his testimony would not die with him. But Henry didn't stop there. Driven by determination, he tried to take his story to the press. Knowing he needed to be cautious, he approached the Albuquerque Journal, a newspaper he trusted. On April 14, 1956, Henry sat down at his desk again to write a letter addressed to a journalist he believed he could trust. The letter began with a desperate plea, explaining that he had information that could change the course of history. However, something happened while he was writing the letter. She was interrupted abruptly, the last sentence remaining incomplete, as if something or someone had interrupted him. What I have to say is vitally important for the future of our society. The world cannot continue, and that was where he stopped. The rest of the page was blank, with no explanation or clue as to why he didn't finish the letter. This interruption, this silence, was more disturbing than any explicit threat. When I found this document, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something had stopped my grandfather from completing his account, and I couldn't help but wonder what it was. My father told me vaguely that my grandfather, Henry Baxley, had ended his days in an insane asylum. Henry Baxley died in the early 1960s, alone and forgotten in an insane asylum, trapped in his own mind. His efforts to reveal the truth had failed, and the pressure of keeping the secret had destroyed him from within. As I closed the folder, I felt a deep sadness and growing fear. I knew that what we had found was dangerous, that the truth my grandfather had tried to bring to light was now in our hands. As I closed the folder containing my grandfather's secrets and revelations, the responsibility of what now rested on my shoulders became overwhelming. In the darkness of my own office, I felt as if Henry Baxley's eyes, even decades after his death, were fixed on me, begging for justice or at least recognition. The decision to bring my grandfather's story to light was not a simple one. The fear of reprisals from the Army and the risk involved were palpable, almost as if I could feel the cold touch of danger lurking around the room. Still, the truth had its own weight, a gravitational pull that pulled toward exposure. Against all threats, I decided that the first thing to do was to carefully scan all the documents, including the handwritten notes, the detailed report, and the interrupted letter. The technology would provide me with a small layer of security. Once online, these documents could be shared quickly, making it harder for any entity to suppress them completely. With a scanner in front of me, I began feeding it page by page, watching each text and image turn into bits and bytes that would soon be floating around the vastness of the network. With each document scanned, Henry's story became more real to me. I could almost hear his voice through his words, his urgency and desperation crystallizing into a narrative that could finally reach the world. But I knew that just scanning and owning the electronic copies wasn't enough. A plan for disclosure was needed that would ensure not only the impact, but also my safety and that of my family. After scanning, I contacted several investigative journalists and activists who had a proven track record of handling sensitive information. Every email sent was encrypted. Every conversation was guarded. Choosing the right time to release information was also crucial. It needed to be a time when society was receptive to this kind of revelation, perhaps in a period of government scandals or debates about transparency and national security. At the same time, I began writing a detailed article, contextualizing Henry's documents and explaining their historical and contemporary importance. I wanted them to be accompanied by a complete narrative when they came to light, one that would help people understand not only what was discovered, but also the human cost involved, my grandfather's sacrifice and the shadow it cast over our family. Finally, before going public, I consulted lawyers specializing in civil rights and press freedom. It was essential to have robust legal support if the forces that tried to silence my grandfather were still active and willing to continue their work of concealment. The night before the planned release, I could barely sleep. Thoughts about the possible consequences of what I was about to do swirled through my mind. However, at dawn, a feeling of peace came over me. It was as if, in deciding to move forward, I had finally honored Henry's memory and the truth he fought so hard to preserve. With a click, the documents were uploaded to media and social media platforms, released into the world like seeds in the wind, each carrying the hope of justice and revelation. Henry Baxley's truth was finally free to be known by all. As the documents were released, the public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media, online forums, and news channels began to buzz with discussions about the implications of Henry Baxley's revelations. Some expressed skepticism, others indignation at the possibility of having been kept in the dark for so long about such fundamental issues. Many academics and ufology experts pored over the documents, analyzing each line in an attempt to better understand the technologies and creatures described. The impact of the disclosure also reignited debates about government transparency and the rights of citizens to know the truth about activities carried out in secret by the state. Panels were organized, documentaries were proposed, and Henry Baxley's name began to be cited as an example of civil courage and scientific integrity. As I watched all of this unfold, I felt a mixture of relief and worry. I knew I had done what was necessary, but I was also aware of the possible consequences. Still, I believed that my grandfather's true story and his tireless search for the truth deserved to be known. Now, given the magnitude of what was discovered and shared, I want to invite you, viewers and readers, to delve deeper into this story and reflect on its implications. If this story of discovery, secret, and revelation resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share your opinions in the comments. I want to know what you thought of this story and what you learned from it. Every like, subscribe, and comment not only supports the channel, but also fuels discussion about important issues of our time. So, participate, share your visions, and let's explore these mysteries even further together. Finally, Henry Baxley's story teaches us about the importance of perseverance in the search for truth and the power of the individual to face systems larger than themselves. I hope this inspires each of you to never stop seeking your own truths, no matter the obstacles. Thanks for watching, and see you next time for more intriguing stories and surprising revelations. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any details.